Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here today. My name is Jessica Heaton, and I have spent the last year serving at StoryStream as the business operations manager and champion for inclusion. I am really excited to be joined today by Will Frazier, the founder of StoryStream and our chief technology officer. And Will has a long and esteemed background in the world of tech. He is a veteran of Microsoft, where he most recently worked in um, software programming and AI, looking for ways to enhance the climate efficiency of data centers. But Will, what we're going to jump in and talk about today is how you came to develop StoryStream. And I'm really excited actually to begin right there. And I would love to hear from you what was happening, what it was that you were encountering that led you to dream up StoryStream and to build it.
In my work at Microsoft, one of the things that was happening around the same time, just before I started StoryStream, was I was doing a lot of work in like emotion understanding, seeing if I could take people's signals and figure out how they were thinking and how they were feeling and whether they were frustrated and things like that. That doesn't directly relate, but it will if I take you the long way around. At the same time, I was writing a novel, and my novel is a thriller. It's set in Mexico, and I had gone 3 or 4 rounds with this novel and just hadn't quite figured it out. And all writers, probably, when ChatGPT came out, I threw my novel in there. I got some feedback. I got told to show rather than tell, and I got some pacing feedback, and it was fine. It wasn't wrong. And then I started to put together some of the research that I'd been doing about emotion detection and figuring out whether we could discover intent. And then that led me to figuring out, well, if we can discover intent from writing, which is a big if, we could discover the writer's point of view of the story and how they saw their characters from a really authentic personal level. I'm looking for a character like this character and a vibe that's like this vibe, but I want the genre breaking in this way, and I want to do something different here, and I want it to end up here. And if you could understand a story from the author's intent, then that would give you a good way to give you an edit of a story. And so the idea of StoryStream really came out of doing really high quality novel editing for writers, because novel editing is very, very expensive. I had been in my third round of my book and I just couldn't afford it anymore. But giving you editing that wasn't just show don't tell that I had received from my editing, it was really about focusing on what your intent was, what my intent was, what I wanted to achieve, and grounding the software based on my intentions, not just some sort of generalized good novel.
You talked about your interest in trying to understand a writer's voice and that really becoming a foundation for StoryStream. And you also talked about some of the early feedback that you got when you were experimenting, around show, don't tell and pacing. But I'm curious, as you've spent this last year developing this tool and really deep diving on excellent writing and the process of editing, what have you found to be the most common weaknesses in people's early drafts? And I mean, beyond that, kind of real broad brush stroke of show don't tell, where do you find that writers really struggle?
It's interesting. We've had many hundreds of manuscripts through StoryStream right now. We've done lots of different edits. And one of the things that we find across the board is pacing. And it's odd, actually. Like, why pacing? You would imagine it would be sort of character development or these really kind of, human emotions, language and style, or maybe genre. But pacing really struck out to me as being something that was kind of odd. Like, it was a nonsensical commonality that everybody had. And so I did a whole series on pacing on my kind of TikTok, and where I did a deep dive on like, why is pacing hard? What is StoryStream saying, and why is it hard? And it turns out that pacing is one of these things that is a masking issue for lots of other kinds of things. I'll give you my example because I don't know other people's vibe. I know my own writing style, my own weaknesses. So I write action really well. When my characters have something to do and somewhere to be, and they open the door and they come through the blah, blah, blah. When they've got something to do, I know how to write that and I know how to pace that fairly well. But I don't know how to pace emotion scenes, or not emotion scenes, but just reflection scenes, right? Scenes where not a lot is happening, or maybe two characters are dissecting a situation and just nothing much is happening other than the dialogue and maybe the reflection about the action that was happening in the previous scene. I'm terrible at it. And so I would race through it. I would race through these things because I'm just not very good at it. I don't know how to do it. I just haven't learned the craft. And so that's an example of one of those things that StoryStream told me it was a pacing issue, which is good. Thank you very much. The writing craft underneath that, I think, is the next level kind of unlock. It's the ninja unlock. Understand the base thing that you're getting wrong and try to work on that. So in my latest drafts, I've really worked on blend of action and reflection and studied up on how to do reflection scenes. There's actually a number of different ways to do good reflection scenes that aren't just having a character look off into the distance and reflecting. It's been really educational. This whole story stream thing has been really, really educational.
So I'm curious, you said you've been learning a lot, and I think as someone who also uses StoryStream, I could speak myself to the way that
Yeah.
StoryStream has helped with that. But I'm curious, as you reflect on what you've built with StoryStream, what you think is a core feature that is really the most transformative to your writing, or that you've gotten feedback from other writers has been most impactful. What really stands out to people as being something that makes a big impact on the writing?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of people have reacted to a lot of different things. Um, One of the things that's really, really helpful is the plot coherence feature. A number of people have mentioned that. There's a lot that you need to keep a track of in a novel, and depending on the kind of novel, there could be like a crazy workflow or spreadsheet of characters and events and things that you have to keep track of.
Hmm.
And so we did a lot of work in the early days about making a really comprehensive plot module. And so that I think saved some people from having dangling subplots and this person's motive was this over here, but it turned into this motive over here, kind of thing. I think the other thing that has really helped people is we spend a lot of work on the character. So the protagonist and the antagonist. I still think with all of Story Stream, it's an adventure. There's still a lot more to do. But the goal, especially with the character one, is because we're a human centered software company, we really want to make sure that our stories are coming alive with our characters. And so we did a lot of work into really pushing the protagonist and the antagonist, really pushing the buttons and figuring out like who is this character really? Who are they? What is their real core wound? We use several different frameworks to kind of assess characters in terms of core wounds and not just like do you have a backstory, but how does your childhood trauma influence what we're seeing now? And so there's a lot of psychology in there. I'm a psychology geek. I could go into that all day. I would love to, my dream coffee shop is just like, let's go through your prompts together. Let's really understand them. I would love to do that with someone. But it's really about deeper understanding and deeper psychology. Because look, I'll say the last thing. I don't know if this is a story stream thing or just writing in general. I think when I wrote my first novel, maybe you find this too, is you have an idea about what you want to say. I want to write a story about this, but there's two things getting in the way to making that story really impactful. And one is like, have you actually gone deep enough on that topic? I want to write about corruption. Okay, give me more. What exactly about corruption? Is it the personal impact, the society, And then the other part of it, which is about craft. Um, you can write a thriller that starts off with a 6-page walk through the forest where nothing happens, but your readers are probably going to expect that and like that. So I think those two things together, a lot of writers will do their first novel and have an imagination about what they want with their first novel, but it's just not on the page yet.
I want to delve a little bit deeper into the role of AI at StoryStream. And I
Yeah.
think circling back to earlier in our conversation, as we shared, your background is in software, you've done work with AI. And so that certainly is a thread here at StoryStream in terms of the programming and construction of StoryStream. And as we know, there are really valid concerns about AI, concerns about the lack of diversity and representation in its creation, concerns about compensation for creatives in terms of intellectual property that's been used to build these models. There are real concerns about people's livelihoods, and then also concerns about it flattening creativity, kind of moving everything to a normed middle, which circling back when we examine what and who has been normed, that can be concerning. And so I would love to just hear from you what your take is on these concerns and what is happening at StoryStream to address them.
Whew. This is such a large topic, and I'm sure there's lots of little different kind of corners and eddies we can get into here. But I think, is it an understatement to say there's some complexity here? On the one hand, artificial intelligence is chewing up water and electricity for our environment. It's stealing data from people who haven't given it permission. It's not attributing people. There are concerns just about it getting data wrong. There's concerns about deep fakes. There's concerns about writing style and having, if an author can go onto a website and have a novel generated in 60 seconds and just upload it, like what is the role of the writer? So, and is AI a good writer? I don't know. I don't think so, but I think there's a whole bunch of negatives which are out there and are totally valid, and I wrestle with a lot. And we can go into a lot. I've got a lot of opinions about a lot of those. Some are hype, and some of them are really valid. On the other hand, it's complicated because as these models progress and as things like very large context windows, the ideas of wiring AI up with tools to make it more advanced, there's a lot of really useful things about AI. And because it's a text-based, effectively a search algorithm, it's very useful for writers. And so I come at it with a skeptical mindset, but I'm also optimistic that if we talk about AI and talk about the AI that we want, with especially for writers, right? I don't know about everybody else, but for writers, we don't have to live in a world where it just says show don't tell. I think if we demand that people get paid for their work and it's not a drain on the environment, and if we demand as a community that we have an AI that actually is good, then some of the benefits of that, I think it's an amazing tool for making us better storytellers. I've done work on StoryStream to get it to probe me as a writer, to say, no, go deeper, no, even deeper. And I've generated some of the best writing that I've done in my career through the help of AI. And so um, I'm optimistic about AI, but I also have really strong feelings that we, especially as a writing community, need to come together and be like, no, this is the AI that we want. And we won't settle for, when you ask the AI something, it's just going to give you the normative view. We won't settle for it stealing other people's works without attribution. So that's a summary of how I feel about it. We can dig into anything if you like.
Well, I did hear you say that you don't think that AI can write, and I would love to pull on that thread and hear more
Yeah.
about that. Why do you think that? And if that's the case, then what is the role of an AI tool in a writer's toolkit?
I'm so passionate about this because it really gets at the idea of like, what is AI doing? I think writers are very smart people, but they just may not have watched the video about what the AI is actually doing. And AI gets a ton of hype, right? So just to break it down, AI is a next word prediction, and it uses a very fancy algorithm to do that. Beautiful piece of mathematics and linear algebra that's doing that. And it's a next word prediction. And so if you talk about doing creative writing is the act of coming up with something original. I have a feeling, I have a character, a setting. I want to say something new that hasn't been said in the world, right? And that originality is actually quite different, fundamentally different than the architecture of AI. AI is not designed to come up with something original. It is a way to predict what the next word is going to be. And mathematically, there are dials and knobs, but the more creative you get by changing the temperature gauge on the AI, the more nonsense the words are. And so I think I think having that grounding in that there are two different goals of these group gives you should give you a good feeling that original ideas are something that AI can fake, but it's not something in the software. There's no me writing the AI code. It's linear algebra. A second thing I think is that it's really important to know that this AI is trained. I say it's a search algorithm. Obviously, it's way more complicated than that. Um, but it's effectively a way to program a search query with the English language and have some text produced. That's kind of a simplistic way of thinking about it, right? The thing is that if you think about it like a search query, almost like a database query or something like that, it gives you the sense of what it's actually doing rather than anthropomorphizing it. I think with AI, sometimes some of the hype is like the AI is thinking for itself. And when it's writing a novel, it's thinking about, well, what's a good novel? And I want to do a novel about this. The AI doesn't want anything, there's no intent there. And so I think that's another key difference with AI and writers that makes me optimistic that the writing field is not going anywhere. Writers have intent, and that will keep on going to make new stories and new genres and new forms of writing, right? That's not going to stop. I think quickly, I'll say the other thing is that along with intent, the AI hasn't done anything. The AI's never done anything. The only representation that it has about the world that we see with our eyes and ears is through a document that it read. And so it doesn't know what it feels like to be dumped by a girl or to be embarrassed in an office meeting, right? It knows what other people have said about it, and he knows what those words and verbs and adverbs look like, but it's never felt it. And so I think this idea of like AI, that's why when you read AI generated text, it sort of feels hollow. And I think there's a core fundamental mathematical impossibility in AI writing really rich prose that we connect with emotionally because of those three things. That was a really
So,
long.
recognizing those limitations, I am curious then what you see as the role of an AI based tool in that writer's toolkit. What use can it serve?
Yeah, writing original text, I think that's the goal of the author. From the heart, it's about human connection and empathy. AI, however, is a really good editor, and so it can just detect patterns really well. That's why it's really good as it's used as a story stream. So, we understand we part of the idea with story stream is, can you mirror the editor's process? And so we put a lot of effort in. Our prompts are really about the editor's process. And so once it's trained on what an editor really looks for, it can find some of those patterns and show you like, hey, you've got a pacing issue here. And it actually turns out to be really good. We went through a lot of beta testing and a lot of tweaking and back and forth. And we've got it to a point where it's really good. When I read the text and the editing feedback, I have the same feedback that the story stream has. So it gives me a good feeling. The other thing, I mean, just in general, is that there's two big things, right? You can put AI, it's really good if you put it in a point of view. So we've got a new feature coming out in StoryStream in a little while called beta readers. And these are AI readers that read from different points of view and look for different things. It's very good at doing that. Um, the other thing it's doing is I think some writers will find this a kind of game changer, and that is research. Back in the day, if you wanted to write a story about being in the desert in Mexico and what animals were there, so you could put an animal in your story, you'd have to go to the library or you'd have to do it on the dial-up connection and figure that out. The fact that we have AI just means that those little bits of research that you have to do along the course of a novel just become much easier. And the effect of that is that your brain power, your limited brain power, is not used on these little tasks. You can get back to the story much quicker. So that's some of the good things that I think I use AI for.
So you've shared some of the tactical ways that StoryStream can empower a writer. And I would love to know from a broader perspective what your vision is for how StoryStream can serve writers in the writer community. What's the higher purpose? What's really that end goal or the big impact that you would hope this would have?
Honestly, I dream of somebody who wouldn't normally have access to the funds to be able to do a proper developmental editing and copy editing cycle. My dream and vision is for a person to be able to get to a New York Times bestseller just using StoryStream. And that's a big vision. I don't know if I'll ever achieve it, but I love the idea of democratizing really well prompted ethical AI to guide people through the complex thorn maze that is writing a novel to the point where they can really tell their story and do it in a unique way, right? Really tell something unique. I love editors. They're very expensive, and I wish editing wasn't so expensive, but I know why it's expensive. I understand it. I've been through many editing cycles. So I think this is a tool that could really enable a lot of people who don't access editors very often, who can't afford to. It's a way to kind of democratize editing so that everybody gets at it.
I am excited also. I know that we have been in partnership with several professional editors, and we're looking at ways that StoryStream can benefit the editing community as well. So, more to come on that in the future, I'm sure. And I guess actually that's a nice segue to what's next at StoryStream. What can StoryStream users or folks who are interested be on the lookout for next?
A lot. Let me see, how much do I want to give away? I think folks know that StoryStream right now is a developmental editor. So the idea is that you trust us with your novel, and we're going to give you a developmental edit. Excuse me, we're going to give you a developmental edit, which is a edit on the large scale structure of your whole novel. How's the pacing working? Is the theme working? Do the characters work, right? This is so you can make kind of structural decisions like merging characters or getting rid of a chapter or subplot. During the writing process, however, there is also an enormous amount of decisions that get made that we'd like to help writers with. And so one of the brand new features that is coming out is a writing surface, a little bit like Pro Writing Aid or some of the other writing surfaces, that builds our deep story understanding engine, this engine about understanding author's intent and understanding character intent and the story graph, understanding that while you're writing. And so that's a big feature that we're launching soon. Look out for that. You can join our Discord if you want to know more. We've got a Connect page if you want to learn more about that. I think involved in that, there's also some work to do with beta readers as well. And so, having access to hearing your chapter, your book from different points of view. Like one example of a beta reader would be a kind of cultural sensitivity beta reader. One of the early pieces of feedback that I got in StoryStream was that my villain was not only two-dimensional, but was maybe a little bit, because he was a Mexican cartel member, it was a bit culturally insensitive. And that was a little hard to hear at first, but it was the feedback that I needed to hear. And I'm so glad that I heard it, because I've made that character a lot more three-dimensional because of that. and much more culturally sensitive. And so these little beta readers are just a way to figure out how are people perceiving your novel from different points of view. Those are the two big things. There are a couple of other things happening in the back burner, but those are the two big things that are coming out soon.
Well, you are someone who always has many ideas swirling around and many projects in development. And I would just love to know, kind of stepping back at large, what are you most curious about or interested about right now in the world?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things going on in the world at the moment. We're in a sea change with AI. We've got political situations, which are just sort of mind boggling on lots of different levels. You know, zooming in on writing, I think this idea of having new genres, like this micro fiction genre, is really interesting. And it makes me think that, fitting your novel into a genre almost a little bit restrictive at some point. And I really am curious about in 5 years' time, after we've got AI and you can literally, talk to a prompt and have a movie made, or have an interactive 3D game made, or invent a new genre. I'm really curious about how people are going to use this admittedly flawed technology, but how we're going to use it for good in a way that, I don't know, betters people, connects people, like helps actually bridge the divide that so many of our political systems seem to be in. I really do think that stories are hardwired into our brain, and they provide a way for us to connect, even though different forces are trying to pull us apart. So I'm a big believer in storytelling, and I'm super curious creatively how AI will picture in that.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate your time today, and I hope this can be the first in a series to dive deeper into what you've built and where things are going next.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.